Hello, and welcome to the second part of our Pro-Life 101, the art of pro-life persuasion. I'm Natasha Wilson, the Coordinator of Education and Outreach for the Office of Respect Life, and I'm joined today with Joanna Coughlin, the Director of the Office of Respect Life, and with the Director of Marriage and Family Life, Edward Herrera, sorry. So again, we had a webinar last week where we did pro-life apologetics, and so this week we want to do more of the conversational side of the pro-life conversation and argumentation. So before we get started, I'd like to start us off first with a prayer. And then I'll also just kind of tell you a little bit more about what we're going to talk about, also another guest that we have with us as well. So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus Christ, merciful Savior of the world, we humbly ask you by your most sacred heart that all the straying sheep may return to you, the shepherd and bishop of their souls, who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So today, I want to first just start off with some brief principles about conversation and how we can kind of structure our conversations. And then we're going to watch a video with our other coworker, Amy Erardi, who is the coordinator of pastoral care in the Office of Respect Life. And she's going to talk about how to speak to someone who has had an abortion about post-abortion healing. And then we will have our special guest, Allie Rake from Charles County Right to Life. She will speak to us about how to speak to a pro-choice friend or family member. Then we'll move on to talk to Edward about how to talk to maybe engaged couples or married couples who may have some experience in this culture of death and how those conversations might come up. And then finally, we'll just talk with Joanna a bit about how we can engage our children and teenagers in the culture of life, and also just talk to them about things they might be hearing on social media, for example. So I'll start off right now with principles for engaging the conversation about abortion. So I just want to kind of talk a little bit about it, starting off with a couple of quotes by St. Thomas Aquinas. So the first quote is, I'm just going to mute videos. So the first quote is, "Better to illuminate than merely to shine, to deliver to others contemplated truths than merely to contemplate." And then the second one is, "We must love both, those whose opinions we share and those whose opinions we reject, for both have labored in the search for truth, and both have helped us in finding it." So I just hope that these two quotes might just ring in your mind as you're thinking about these conversations. So the first thing is we'd like to begin in prayer before we have our conversations. You don't necessarily have to do it at that moment, but maybe if you know you're about to go into a conversation with someone about this very difficult issue, you can just say a prayer, quick prayer to the Holy Spirit. And you can do it before or after the conversation. Sometimes after the conversation, you might be feeling a little bit emotional, so you might need to just pray and just let that emotion go to God. Again, ask the Holy Spirit to give you the words to say. Another thing is just to be ready to admit when you're wrong. So I went through a PhD process, and one of the biggest things that they told us was, know your limits of your knowledge. Don't try to act like you know something that you don't. If you don't know it, just admit that you don't know it. But you can also say, I don't have the answer right now, but I'd like to get back to you on that. And then take some time to research it. People do really appreciate when you do that. Another thing is to just begin to practice detachment from the outcome of the situation. This is something that I've had to practice recently, because oftentimes we are just planting seeds. Sometimes that sounds kind of trite, but that's what happened with me. I had a coworker who challenged me on my views a long time ago when I was pro-choice, and it took nearly a decade for that to actually come to fruition in my life for me to be pro-life. So just realize that sometimes the outcome, you may not see it, so just be patient and have detachment. Then I just like to go over just some ideas I got from someone named Chloe Baldari on the theory of enchantment, and she was just trying to give, again, another framework for thinking about having conversations with people about difficult issues. So the first thing that she says is to remember that we are human beings and not merely political abstractions. So under that, we like to avoid stereotypes, avoid dehumanization and abstraction, and then sometimes less is more. So we'd like to try to simplify our arguments, and we spoke about that in the last webinar. How do you simplify the issue? And you'd also want to avoid kind of tangential lines of argumentation. Just try to stay along one line of argumentation. And then also you'd like to try to, what I didn't coin this, but I like to talk about is steel manning the argument versus straw manning an argument. So instead of arguing what you think the person is trying to say, focus on the best rationale for their position, and then try to speak to that. And then the last couple things are criticize in order to uplift or empower and never to destroy. So constructive criticism, essentially. So the objective of this is to believe in the person's potential. So believe that they have good intentions, for example. I think oftentimes in these arguments on both sides, we begin to think that the other person has bad intentions. So believe that they have good intentions, and then again, that the criticism that you offer still is undergirded by the fundamental belief in the person. And then everything that we do should be rooted in love and compassion. So one thing that we often talk about in the office is about rehumanizing the space. So trying to maybe even get people into a space that feels a little bit more human, like a coffee shop, for example, someplace where people feel very comfortable and not feel like they're on their guard, where you can feel comfortable and not feel like you're on your guard. And then again, bring back compassion and empathy amid disagreement. So those are just some principles that I thought about for this conversation, and I just wanted to share those things with you all before we enter into some of the more specific conversations that we want to talk about. So now we'll move into talking to someone who has had an abortion. And since Amy could not join us in person today, we pre-recorded her. So I'm gonna have you all watch and listen to her video. Just 1 second. Excuse the technical difficulties. Well, thank you for coming today, Amy. We're doing our pro-life 101, the art of pro-life persuasion. So we're just glad to have you here to talk to us about how we can speak to women and men who are hurting after abortion, and especially if it comes up in a conversation. Sometimes our friends, family members might reveal that they've had a previous abortion in mid-conversation. And so we would just like to help our friends be able to have these conversations in a gentle and loving way. So we wanted to pick your brain because you do this on a regular basis, and you give us some good advice about it. So, you know, just imagine, you know, maybe previous conversations that you've had, or, you know, just maybe just a general imagining someone saying to you, you know, a few years ago, I was in a bad situation and I had an abortion. What would you say to that?
I think this is a good idea. I like this idea. So thank you for having me. Thank you for picking my brain. So I think we have a lot of great resources. Number one, in our office. So I'm going to utilize this, how to talk to a friend who has had an abortion. And I think this is a really great, very just basic thing. I think this is really basic, but I think it's really important. And I think number one, listening. I think when somebody approaches you with just this kind of bombshell, bomb, people tend to get scared, worried, do I have these gifts to take care of this that just landed in my lap? And I do think that God has given us the gifts and talents to provide a loving, gentle response in this manner. So I think just kind of number one, listening is really, listen with your heart, listen as if you're just being utilized as a vessel for God to kind of flow through you, and be very loving. There's, at that point, you don't have an agenda. You just have to listen and really provide the space, a safe space. Confidentiality is a huge aspect of Project Rachel, so you want to provide a confidential space. And obviously, if this friend is pouring out their soul to you, they know you and they know they can trust you. So number one, that's a well, besides listening, number two, confidentiality. Assure her of your love and support. You know, we've all sinned, we've all made bad decisions, and there's no sin that's greater. You know, this is a pretty heavy thing to talk about, though. Make sure that you know your resources. I think that's a huge opportunity to share resources. I don't have all the skills and talents that are going to help someone. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a priest. I'm not somebody who can offer certain sacraments, but I can get them in touch with people who can offer those. But listening to what she needs, it could be just someone to talk to, one-on-one, someone to listen. They might need a counselor. They might need somebody who is post-abortive, and to just walk with them a little bit. They may also need something a little more than we can provide, like if they're suicidal, and that can happen. So you really have to keep that ear open so that you hear the main concerns of what she needs. My job here at Project Rachel is the telephone intake. This is I'm just going to read a couple things here. Just the basic stuff in conversation, like as a friend, how can I help you? What can I do for you? Listening to their needs. What is troubling you the most is a question that I may ask. There's some checklists for some symptoms that they may be feeling. Are they feeling guilty? Do they have anxiety? Are they sorrowful? Are they abusing drugs, alcohol? Are they suffering with low self-esteem issues? And then again, on that other end of the spectrum, are they suicidal? That's a really serious thing. Are they struggling with their relationship with God? Do they have a lot of anger? And I think just being alert to some of those things is good. Do they currently have a relationship with a counselor? Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they need to be in touch with somebody who's maybe specifically trained to deal with post-abortion ministry, post-abortion healing. And then really just ask them what they think they need. Just ask them, how do you think I can help you? Or how do you think Project Rachel can help you? So just being a listening ear. So that's what I would say.
Great. Yeah. Definitely is important, especially with such a difficult and traumatic experience, to listen and to just have an open ear, open perspective to what the person is saying to you. And you were kind of mentioning ways in which we might be limited in this conversation. So we can't necessarily be the counselor for this person, for example. So those are things that we can also think about too, is what are the limitations of what we can offer just in this particular conversation, and how we can help them to find what they need. What might be some things that maybe you've seen people say or do in conversations that might be harmful or not helpful that you could share?
That's a good question. I think along the lines there, of course, there's no one cookie cutter answer for every situation, but you want to avoid some of these things. I'll just run through some of these things. You want to avoid saying or telling her how he or she should feel. They have the right to feel however they feel. That they're sharing a loss. Like you said, it's traumatic, and it is very sad for some people. It's almost just an overwhelming sorrow. So you don't need to be positive. This is a tough thing to deal with, and you just really want to be there for them. You should never tell them that they should be over it by now. This is a grief in working with these people, this population of people, this group of people that are post-abortive. They feel very sad for a very long time. And sometimes that's lifelong grief. And we never want to, make them feel like they should be over the grief or the trauma. If you don't understand them, don't tell them that you understand. Don't tell them that they were ready. They were not ready to have a child. You know, there's things that you can kind of touch that are not as loving. You know, there's just some things that you don't, because you don't know. You just don't know. Don't tell them they will get over this. Don't tell them it is for the best. Don't tell them what you did was the best at the time. You know, there's just sometimes not saying things that are so concrete is a good thing. You don't even know if they may have had multiple abortions too. So you don't know how many abortions they have had, or how many traumas, or how many losses. Sometimes women who have had multiple abortions, they don't remember the actual number sometimes. So kind of on the flip side of that, what you want to do is, like we said, listen, allow her to talk or him to talk, allow them to express their anger, their sorrow, their remorse. Watch out for things like isolation and things like that. Allow them to grieve. Just allow them to be in that safe space with you. Be there for them. It's a wound. It's a deep wound, and just give them that space.
Thank you. So you did mention not just her, but you also said him.
Yes.
And that there may be men who are also suffering with abortion. So maybe briefly, in maybe a minute or so, you could tell us a little bit about men and how they deal with this.
I, just being in the ministry for about a year, I haven't had a lot of calls from men. I've had 3 total calls and emails. But what is interesting, in one of our brochures called The Hollow Men, again, we have a lot of resources here, so if you ever need any or want any, just let me know. The first ever conference on men and abortion took place in 2007. So really just kind of the timeline of everything, men don't always allow themselves to grieve. They don't always know they can grieve. And just kind of the stats in this are men often express, they tend to exert greater control over the expression of these painful emotions. They intellectualize grief, they cope alone. They're inclined to identify their primary role as supporter for their partners, even after an abortion. Even if they were opposed to the decision, men are likely to experience feelings of despair long after the abortion than women, and men are at risk for experiencing chronic grief. So it's kind of a silent suffering. And I think the more we talk about it and the more we allow men to have a safe space, I think more men will come forward. I always try to get a man in touch with another man. I think that's really important to their healing. I've been able to get in touch some of the men with deacons or priests, and just facilitate some of their first steps in the healing process. We do offer retreats for women and men, and I think that's important for them to know that there's stuff available for them, and it does affect men. It just affects them a little differently. We see it a little differently in their healing process, but we want men to come forward, and we want them to know that there's healing available for them too.
Well, thank you so much, Amy, for talking to us and giving us some great pointers on how to have conversations with those who are struggling after abortion, and hotfully that we can get them some healing. So could you please let them know how they can get in contact with you?
Yes, you can call the Confidential Project Rachel helpline it is. And if I can talk confidentially, I'll answer the phone, but you're welcome to leave a message and I'll get back to you. It's 410-625-8491, or you can email me at the projectrachel@archbalt.org, or my personal email, which is amy.eroarty@archbalt.org.
So I'll just add a few things to what Amy shared with us. I think it's important to remember that these conversations don't exist in isolation. Sometimes it comes up or comes out that someone says in the middle of a hearty debate on politics or the issue of abortion or the reality of abortion, they'll just say, well, I've had one and there's that. Sometimes just giving people the permission to talk more about it is all they really need, is an invitation, but also the permission not to talk about it. People will say that, I've heard that, countless times, and maybe giving them a little space to talk about that if they want to, but also understand that that might not have been an invitation for us to open that conversation. It might just have been something they threw out there. Also, in talking, whenever we're talking to someone who's had some experience. It would be extremely rare that the person you're talking to doesn't at least know someone, their daughter or their sister or their best friend or someone they knew in college. Everybody knows somebody, or nearly everybody knows somebody, whether they know that they know them or not. So when we're talking about this, we kind of have to keep that in the back of our mind far before we hear it from someone, that they're likely to either know someone intimately or just have an experience themselves. And then finally, when Amy was talking about giving people permission to grieve the way that they want to or to not grieve, one of the other tips that I've heard from a lot of Project Rachel coordinators around the country is that when we talk to people, we let them own the language. That if they say, you know, I aborted my fetus, okay, then in that moment and where they are right now, or I terminated my pregnancy. It's okay to use that language when talking to people about something that's very personal to them. That's not the moment to argue with them on a technicality, because you're in a kind of, you've shifted into a different space, at least temporarily. And sometimes that's the end of the initial conversation, which is also fine. I know a lot of times when we're on a roll, we have something that we need to say and we need to get to the end of our argument, but maybe God has derailed us for a reason, and just to kind of go where we end up until there's at least an opportunity for a warm transfer to a ministry like Project Rachel. But that's, I think, all we have on talking to someone who has experienced abortion or knows someone who is. And now we have Allie Brack here to talk to us about talking to pro-choice family members or friends.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry.
Right. Thank you for joining us. And we know you have
Sure.
your kiddos home with you. So our first, so I think we mentioned earlier that Allie is not just kind of a personal pro-life warrior, but she also is the head of Charles County Right to Life. So she does a lot of work with public speaking, just a lot of, you know, farm fair type things like tabling, and also social media outreach. She's got experience in all these different areas, in addition to obviously her just personal ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So our first question for you specifically, though, is if you were at a family gathering and your sister politics and has very different political views than you, I don't know if you even have a sister or if she would do this, but
I do, and she does have a very different.
There we go. So we're ready. She turns to you and says, "These people aren't pro-life; they're against a woman's right to choose." What would you say?
So the first thing to remember is that, especially right now, while tempers are very hot about abortion, absolutely everyone is talking about abortion, which is a dream for the pro-life cause, because we have something to do, but is very emotional for everyone else. Is like, you never want to come in defensive. You never want to like take a breath and then just come in loaded for bear. What you want to do is I never come in and just assert my opinion right away. Like, this is what I believe in, because then it's just this really hot situation where you're just arguing back and forth. And just to give like an actual real world example, my sister and I have begun the conversation about abortion. We did it through email because she lives farther away from me. And she texted me a week ago and asked me what I thought about Alabama. And I was like, you know what? We're going to do this over a glass of wine when we're in person. We're not going to do this over text. So definitely take control of the conversation. You kind of want to focus on answering the question, what are the unborn? You want to ask questions that are focused on the humanity of the preborn baby. You don't want to get lost into the weeds about other things that people think or feel about pro-life people. You want to stick to the pro-life position. One of my favorite pro-life apologists, who's also Catholic Answers apologist, is Trent Horn. And he says that if you're not sure where to start, you can always just ask, well, what is it that you believe about abortion and why? Or how did you come to that belief? And then sit back and listen. Really listen too. Don't just listen for that moment when you can speak, but actually listen to what they're saying and consider what they're saying. Ask follow-up questions for clarity. You'll actually be really surprised when you ask somebody what it is they believe, and then ask for clarification of something that they've said, because you'll be pretty surprised about their rationale. I actually asked this of someone, I said, what is it that you believe and how did you come to that belief? And they, I'm not kidding, gave me a pro-life answer that they think it's wrong to kill innocent people, that they oppose bombing children in, war, and they even oppose the death penalty. But then there's just something about abortion. They just don't want to limit women's choices. So, that can be really telling. But if you appear to be open-minded and willing to listen, then your sister will feel valued as a person, and she'll be safe, emotionally safe, to share that opinion with you. And she thinks that you're going to value her sharing of her beliefs, even if you don't agree with those beliefs, because at the end of the conversation, she might not change your mind and agree with yours, but at least you'll have mutual respect. So after listening to and maybe asking a few clarifying questions, you're going to want to find common ground wherever possible. So agree wherever possible. So if she just says, well, women need options, then agree. I think women need lots of options. I think women need the most empowering options for them. If they say, what about women in poverty? Then you say, I agree that poverty is a difficult situation, and we should definitely seek to alleviate poverty. And if you have experience with poverty, definitely bring that to the table. But if you don't have experience with poverty, admit that. Women who don't have a supportive partner, agree that women should have support systems, and that we should, do things that support women. You may even briefly, you don't want to make it the focus of the conversation. You might say, yeah, that is actually why I support my local pregnancy care center, because they give, support to women who don't have a lot of support. And then it's at that point, after you've controlled the conversation with questions, that you might assert your opinion. And you don't want, to say something really hostile or defensive, but you say, what I believe is that abortion kills a human being. I think killing innocent human beings is wrong, and therefore abortion is wrong. And then kind of let the conversation flow from there. That's a good way to handle familial conversations, is just to ask good questions, agree wherever possible, don't be defensive, and stick to what are the unborn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you said avoid hostile statements. I think so, in the heat of the moment,
Yeah.
you forget what might come off as hostile to someone who doesn't live in like the kind of, we all live in some sort of bubble, like we all do for a living and have the friends that we have. Can you give us some examples of some of those hostile statements that either you've accidentally made or you've heard other people make, where people step back and said,
yeah. So some things might be like, if you're talking with someone who's not religious and you assert that like God is the author of life, and you say it like that, that can be, it's like, well, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in your God. They'll say that. And then all of a sudden you're arguing about, does God exist and whose God is right? Some people actually do come to, I don't know how, but it does happen. They come to a pro-choice view from a religious perspective. A lot of what I've been seeing lately is a lot of people asserting that, in the Jewish faith, abortion is okay in certain circumstances because they don't believe that it's a valuable life until they take the first breath. So I totally avoid any sort of discussion about who says abortion is wrong, meaning like God. So that's one. Or you never want to say, birth control exists. Why can't these women just prevent these pregnancies before they even have to have abortion? Like, that's a really hostile statement. Or saying anything about women should keep their legs closed, or sort of things like that. While some of these things may be technically true, they are not persuasive to a person who disagrees with you. And that's why I say definitely avoid like hostile statements. Definitely avoid dehumanizing language. Like, you want the person that you're talking to also to agree that fetuses, zygotes, embryos are human beings who are worthy of dignity and respect and a right to life. Well, the person that you're talking with, and women who have had or seek to have abortions, are human beings too. And especially if you believe that God is the author of life and that every human person is made in the image and likeness of God, then you should offer that dignity and respect to those people too. So you definitely want to avoid any dehumanizing statements or language, even if the person you're talking with is also, is hostile towards that belief. You know, because that it's just, you know, do you want to be persuasive, or you just want to be right? So you want to err on the side of persuasive.
Okay. I have two quick more questions for you, but I know Natasha's going to nudge me soon and say that we're moving on. So under what conditions do we just end a conversation? Do we just say, this is not fruitful, this is not good for either of us? When and how do you do that?
So, you know, I recently had a conversation with someone who kept asserting that zygotes are not alive. And I said, well, how can you say that? You know, what demonstration? And they said, well, sperm is living and skin cells are living. So when I demonstrated to her that a zygote is a whole human organism that is growing and developing, and left in the proper environment and given nutrition and time, will continue to grow into a fully developed human being. And after human beings are born, they continue to grow and develop. Skin cells don't do that, and sperm cells don't do that. This particular person continued to assert that if I say the zygote is alive, I have to say that sperm cells and skin cells are alive in the same way. And we were going round and round. I'm like, you know what? This is not a fruitful conversation. No one's mind is being changed. Thank you for talking, but I think we should let this go. Similarly, if you're in a situation with your sister and you feel angry at any moment, you feel like you are, like the rage is bubbling up or your adrenaline is pumping in a negative way, then that is a good time to end the conversation. Definitely follow your gut. And the way to do that would be, you know, I'd love to continue this at another time, but not, you know, not when our tempers are flaring or when I'm really feeling anxious about the conversation. I think you and I both need to be in a good, safe, emotional place. And so maybe we could take a deep breath, you know, really think about what it is we believe, and we can come back to this conversation at another time. That's probably how I would do it. There are siblings, especially siblings. I keep going back to that because I do have siblings who disagree with me vehemently on certain issues, that I just say, you know what, we've been down this road before, and I just think politics, religion is not a topic that we should go to. You know, so just remember that not every single person you have a conversation with, you need to end that conversation with like somebody's mind being changed. Like not everybody's minds are going to be changed. And as Natasha said, you always want to pray to the Holy Spirit before you have a conversation and things like that. And the Holy Spirit will definitely guide you and tell you like this isn't going to happen right now, and you can stop.
I have one more quick question, but I know that you have folks calling you
that are running into the room. I'm really sorry.
No problem. So I know that you do a lot of this on social media. Obviously, in person is best, but it's not always a possibility. If you could give us 2 or 3 quick tips, because those are to my kids, and how do I do this on social media? 2 or 3 quick pieces of advice.
Yeah, so social media is really difficult. We're still kind of testing social media, okay? What I can say is I follow somewhat of the lead of the Equal Rights Institute, who are, that's definitely a resource that I send people to a lot. But what they say is that like jumping into a comment section and going back and forth, not ever going to be fruitful. Never, never, never. So what you do is, like, if you're kind of among strangers, you might want to pick out the person who's most reasonable, send them a private message and say, hey, you know, I was really interested in what you had to say about X, you know, and pick something that they said that kind of made them seem open-minded, but I'm just wondering what you meant about, you know, this, like, would you mind talking with me about that? And then you can have a really good conversation employing those same principles of asking questions, clarifying, and finding common ground with someone offline. Like, you can do it through Messenger, or you can exchange emails. So that's one way. And then as far as your personal social media page, sharing positive culture of life messages, so in ways that humanize, you know, the unborn, can be really effective. Every once in a while, you definitely want to go and be brave and share something on your page, maybe about late-term abortions, because many people really disagree about late-term abortions. And we are in Maryland, where late-term abortions are, you know, definitely vastly legal. So, you know, and also off in practice. So that's common ground with people to say, you know what, wherever you stand on the pro-life issue, I think most people will agree with me that this is wrong. And so, you know, you could share something like that. Again, though, you always want to take the debate offline. You don't really want to have it too often on your walls. I have done that sometimes. I've had mixed results.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Allie. Yeah, thank you, Allie.
No problem. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So just as we move to the next person, oops, sorry, Ali, I stopped your video by accident. But just as we move to our next discussion, I just wanted to give a little bit of, sorry. Well, just cancel the spotlight. There we go, cancel the spotlight, okay. Didn't I just cancel the spotlight? Okay. I don't know what to do. Oh, here we go, spotlight. Oh, sorry. Just from my own experience too of having these conversations, I also personally try to stop conversations when they go into what they call ad hominem attacks. So when they're attacking, when someone is attacking a person, just because I don't think that that's, again, a fruitful conversation. And I also don't think it's beneficial to either party that you be attacked or that they attack you, or you attack them. So if it's devolving into personal character attacks, I would also say that's a time to end the conversation. So now we're going to talk to Edward Herrera, and again, he's the Director of Marriage and Family Life here in the Department of Evangelization at the Archdiocese of Baltimore. And he's also our co-worker and works very closely with us on life issues, especially concerning the family, which is a huge part of the conversation that I don't think we always get a chance to talk about. So we wanted to just pick your brain a little bit, Edward, about how this conversation might come up with couples, either maybe if they're preparing for marriage, or even maybe once they're married. Sometimes people, everyone may have a past, and maybe they come into their marriage preparation or into their marriages with being touched by the culture of death. So how does this topic sometimes come up in these contexts?
Yeah, so usually it would come up, I mean, a lot of times with some of our preparation inventories, you might get where there's questions about maybe abuse in the past or something like that. So that's an area where it could come up in a confidential way, but then there's still a need to perhaps talk through it with the individual or the couple more specifically. I think one of the very important things is really having a relationship with the couple, though, to start with. That's an essential piece. One of my favorite lines is from Pride and Prejudice, where Elizabeth is, looking for a husband, essentially, and at a certain point, she tells this older woman, "I'm not going to take advice from someone who has nothing to do with my life." Right, and which, the point is that they would, and Elizabeth does, look to family members to kind of guide her in the courtship process, but we don't look to someone who really doesn't care about us, who doesn't love us and care about our best interest. So I think that that's a very important piece, is to really first develop a relationship with people, which is essentially essential in marriage prep more generally, right? We have to have a relationship with the couples that we're working with. A lot of times then questions come up of, should we talk about it in a more individualized context or in a classroom setting? I think that in the classroom setting, it can be brought up more as a presentation of the teaching of the church. And usually the best way to do that, I think, oftentimes is through the wisdom of John Paul II's theology of the body. So really proposing the beauty of what we're called to in giving ourselves in marriage. And so speaking about it in that way, and then obviously on a one-on-one basis, you're able to talk through those things even more. But again, I stress the importance of the relationship. When I don't have the opportunity to meet as much with couples on a one-on-one basis at the Archdiocese, but when I was at a parish, for example, another challenging issue to talk with couples about is cohabitation. We know couples cohabit about 1,000% more than they did in the 1960s. So the vast majority of our couples are cohabiting. And I wouldn't usually have that conversation on the first evening, right? You're slowly getting to know the couple, and then you might enter into that conversation. So I think that's an important point. And then another one is I think sometimes we try to, and we know that the inoculant pill can act as an abortifacient, but that's sometimes not the most helpful thing to talk about within a marriage prep context, right? If you're trying to encourage a couple to not use contraceptives, to be open to the church's teaching on natural family planning, fertility awareness, these sorts of things, to kind of present a hostile audience in some ways within an even more challenging topic within this context can be pretty hard. So having those conversations, I think, in a little bit of a different setting can be more effective. So those are a few ways that it can come up, but then a few pointers as well.
And you kind of mentioned that couples, as they come to the church, are maybe a little bit less familiar with the church teachings, maybe a little bit hostile to them. And so can you just give us a little bit of an understanding of where people kind of are as they're coming into this process, so we can know how we would engage them in that personal, that relational level?
Yeah, I mean, so the vast majority of our couples, probably about 90% of our couples, are millennials, right? So they are going to be those folks that are born kind of 1980 and after. Is going to be the vast majority of the couples that we're preparing right now. And most of those folks, what we know from just the social science status are that they are detached from the church, they're detached from institutions more generally. So there's going to be not a real awareness. I mean, as we know, the formation, if they are detached from the church, is probably not going to be the greatest level. But what I have found, and this speaks a little bit more to natural family planning, I think, than abortion necessarily, but I think there are some correlations there, that there is much more of an openness at this point to natural family planning, for example. Like, I think we had a generation that following Humanae Vitae and the introduction of the pill in the U.S. and its FDA approval and things like that, where there was a kind of a sort of rebuke of kind of the so-called rhythm method, and as a result, there was a real hostility towards that aspect of the church's teaching, and an obstinacy towards it. And what I find is that now there is more of an openness to the church's teaching on these things. And part of that's because of women's experience and the recognition that, you know, a lot of women don't feel good while they're on the pill, right? And so, like, kind of that a deeper sense of reality. And that could also be the case, I would hope, with the question of abortion, that there's a deeper sense of what actually is going on here in pregnancy and in the life that's conceived. So I think that there is more of an openness, and I think that a lot of the social science and the is kind of pointing us in that direction.
So the statistics say that about maybe 1 in 3 women will have had an abortion by the time they're 45 years old. So even within our parishes and amongst our couples that are already married, there may be women who have had an abortion, couples have had abortions. What would you say, especially maybe to just the parish environment, how to make it more of a safe space for these women to seek out help, such as Project Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a tricky question. You know, I'm actually talking with some of our pastors about addressing the issue of pornography too, right? And I think that talking about some of these issues, it's like, when do you talk about it? How do you talk about it? And I think that there are some very simple ways that parishes can kind of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, like our office and the Respect Life office put together some help flyers where it's got everything from abortion healing, post-abortive healing, to domestic violence, to miscarriage ministry. So that's kind of an easy thing, just, you know, in the bathrooms to hang up a men's flyer, a women's flyer. Then also, if, you know, I think that some things that could be more kind of a little bit more deliberate in that way would be to, just as you're doing things with, I think, baby bottles and stuff like that at different times of year to support the local pregnancy centers, are there ways in which we can also just share this ministry of healing with your parish? And because abortion might not be age appropriate for everyone in the pews, is there a way in which the pastor can communicate some of that with his parishioners, whether it be, if he writes a weekly letter or some of these sorts of things, if there can be an opportunity to share it a little bit more deliberately. And because, I think it's a ministry of healing, and it has really an ability to change hearts and change minds, because it really focuses on just pastoral care and the woundedness that we all experience. So.
Well, thank you, Edward. And can you just let everyone know how they can get in contact with you for anything having to do with marriage and family life?
Absolutely. So if you want to reach me via email, my email address is edward.herrera, and that's HERRERA @archbalt.org. You can also go to the website, www.archbalt.org, and under the ministries, it has marriage and family life, so you can always reach out to me that way as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're just going to spend a few more minutes talking with Joanna about how to just bring up the culture of life with our children and teens. And then we may go over a few minutes, but we do want to be able to take your questions, so you can stay on. But if you can't stay on past 12, that's okay. But we would like to be able to take questions. So Joanna, could you tell us a little bit about how one might talk to your child about the culture of life and just some general principles about this?
All right, so I'll say a couple of things. One, I firmly believe that each child is so very, very different, and parents know their children the best. And so in no way am I kind of saying that this is what you should do with your child. I have heard different suggestions, recommendations, don't use the word abortion before 5th grade, or, when you start to talk about theology of the body and when they're X years old. I think those guidelines are a little bit less helpful. I think, but a couple of principles might guide you in the process of discerning really what's best for your child, or maybe a godchild or someone that you're working with. Just to remember that they will hear that word, and they will hear about the culture of death, whether you share it with them or whether they are on social media or hear about it from their friends. The different families talk more or less openly about politics, about issues, about all these things. And so if they don't hear it from you, they will hear it somewhere else. So to kind of know your child's audience too, to know who's informing your child, the influences in your child's life that may be casual or inadvertent. Another, 7-year-old child be like, well, my mom said this, just so that they're not caught off guard and confused and have some misperceptions early on. But on the flip side of that, not just to kind of combat what they might hear there, but to grow and kind of cultivate in your family, in your home, in your community, with your friends, these messages about virtue, about life, about love. I mean, we can lean into beauty in a real way with children. I think these principles kind of apply to everybody. I think the truth is sometimes hardest to swallow, but if you lean into goodness, which hopefully they know from their parents and their community, but also beauty, they can find the truth on their own. I have lots of children in a range of ages. And so obviously there's different ways I talk to them because of their age, but also because of their personality. One of my kids is very intellectually focused. It's all about science and, what's written and what's provable. And so with him, it's real easy to go to embryology even, to talk about human development, to talk about the law, to talk about rightness and wrongness, laws that have been changed in the past and what our laws are now. With some of my other kids, I'll probably never have that conversation until they're much, much older. But we can always talk about the people we know, the people in their lives. When I'm pregnant, we talk to the baby. We talk about the baby as an existing member of our family. My kids know how their life began. They know about how they grew up in the womb. They know about different fetal development landmarks so that they can be excited for their godparents and their friends' siblings that are growing in the womb. We talk about the elderly in a very special way and those with disabilities. I sometimes put my kids out of their comfort zone when it comes to those folks with special needs or the elderly, and say, yeah, this is not necessarily who you're used to spending time with, but you're going to do this because they're people just like you're people, and you're going to be one of them one day when you're elderly. And so I think kind of challenging your kids and pushing them outside of their comfort zone as soon as they're ready to be pushed is important. We hear a lot. It's like I said earlier, in the last couple of weeks with the Alyssa Milano stuff on social media and all these laws being passed, I've heard from a lot of grandparents, what do I tell my grandkids? My teenage granddaughter has no idea what's up, but the messages she's receiving are so conflicting. At that point, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to start from square one when they're 14 years old and they've been influenced in so many different ways. So if you lay the foundation with baby steps early on fetal development, about how people who are different are still have dignity, still deserve respect. If you talk about theology of the body from when they're very young in an age appropriate way, when they get to that point, you don't have to start kind of a curriculum from the beginning. There's so many steps built up that they are likely to reach those conclusions on their own and just need some reinforcement. And to use real life examples, there's some great methods out there that use picture books or use video or different things that kids can embrace and understand in a less theoretical way. That's my experience.
Thank you, Joanna. So now we'd like to just open it up for some questions.